accessed the podcast of OA. Located deep within Sector 14845 and powered by the Emerald Light of Will, the podcast of OA is your guide to the Green Lantern universe. Hosted by Lantern Myron Rumsey, the podcast of OA begins now.
Welcome to 2021, Green Lantern fans. This is the podcast of OA, episode number 185. I'm your co-host, Myron Rumsey, joined by my good buddy, Phil. And we've got some interesting stuff to talk about tonight, Phil. How's everything going? How's your new year been?
Everything's great, man. Happy New Year to everybody listening. We rang in the new year. It was good. Clark's doing great. He's vertical now, so he's on the move everywhere. Walking in many places now. So, yeah, everything's great, man. We start back to students come back next week to our school, and we're looking forward to, I guess, what you would call maybe a minuscule part of normalcy. I don't know. Otherwise, everything's great, man. And I'm glad to be on here again. You know, Christmas was wonderful. I just had a fantastic time with the family and everything, and looking forward to making sure that this year goes a little bit better than the last one.
Yes, that's true. Yeah. Before we get into the episode, we're going to be talking about Future State Green Lantern tonight. But before we get into all of that, every year in January, I always take some time to talk about my birth defect, because January is National Birth Defects Prevention Month. Okay. And so I always share the information with folks. My birth defect is very rare. It's called esophageal atresia with a tracheoesophageal fistula. Long story, which is a long phrase, basically meaning that a disconnection in your esophagus and a connection usually to your trachea.
Okay, side note, that is the Green Lantern of what sector?
It's basically a birth defect where a child is born and their esophagus, when you're in the womb developing, your esophagus grows from your throat down and from your stomach up, and they generally connect. In a normal pregnancy, they connect together. And people like myself who are born with this birth defect, either the upper half or the lower half or both, might be connected to the trachea. Or they're not connected at all, and one of the segments is connected to the trachea. So it's a very rare birth defect. 1 in 4,000 pregnancies result in a child with this birth defect. The version of which I have, where the upper half of my esophagus grew into my trachea, is 0.1% of the 1 in 4,000. So obviously my version is I think the rarest of the bunch. So just putting the information out there. You can find out more about all kinds of birth defects at the March of Dimes. There's not really a charity for my particular birth defect, but there are people like myself who are out there talking to parents of kids and kids who are born with this birth defect and helping them figure out how to navigate things, because there's not a lot of information, not a lot of research. One thing I was able to do is I signed up this year to donate some DNA for some genetic research, because they're trying to figure out what triggers this particular birth defect and some other ones that connect to it. So that's my sales pitch for the year. Everybody's off the hook for the rest of 2021.
There you go. That's good news, though. I mean, it's good information, and it's good to put it out there to people. You know, I mean, everybody suffers from something of one form or another, and you know, everybody's different when it comes to their personal history, you know, and yeah, you share yours, and we appreciate that. And, you know, as do, I'm sure, our listeners do.
It's generally something as well that you wouldn't know the person has this birth defect unless you were watching them eat or they coughed. You wouldn't know the difference, because there's no physical triggers that lean out, but we all cough. And I think I've done my cough once on mic, which we kept on mic. Sometimes I cough when we record, and I eliminate that in post-production. But I have coughed on the show before to share the experience. If you hear someone with my birth defect cough, you will know, because we sound like Godzilla. But anyway, we've got Future State Green Lantern number 1 to talk about, and we have a Know Your Core segment, and we've got a little bit of news, something that just happened. Now, you and I are recording this on January 14th. A news story that literally just broke within the last hour or so before we recorded was that more information has been released about the new Green Lantern series, which will kick off in April, written by Geoffrey Thorne. Now, originally, that was supposed to be drawn by Tom Rainey, but it looks like now the artist is going to be Dexter Soy. The new series launches April 6th as part of the new Infinite Frontier era, and it does star Jon Stewart, which we all knew, but it's also going to be featuring Teen Lantern and Joe Mullein. And part of the plot to this is the newly formed United Planets and the Guardians of the Universe hold an intergalactic summit to decide who can best serve and protect the cosmos from danger. With the majority of Green Lanterns called back to Oa, Jon Stewart arrives alongside Teen Lantern Kelly Quintella, whose powerful gauntlet could be one of the most powerful and unstable weapons in the universe. With the entire landscape of the universe in flux, is this the end of the Green Lantern Corps or a new beginning? And so Joe Mullein will join the Corps to find out why the Central Power Battery exploded. Again, and they are on the case together, and the article alludes to them as the world's finest lanterns, which I had to really suppress myself. If you can't tell, my eyes are rolling right now. You may be able to hear that on mic. I don't know, but it's I don't know. What do you think about that one?
Well, worth noting, if you find the article. It shows other lanterns on there.
On the cover, yeah.
To my amazement, we have none other than the returned Simon Baz from wherever he was in the multiverse.
Yeah, the cover has Simon Baz. Interesting, next to Simon Baz on the cover is Soranik Natu wearing a Green Lantern uniform again. So I'm not sure how that happened. You see Salak, you see Aricia, you see Badge. You see a number of different lanterns, but Guy Gardner's there. Looks like Azamat Cole, Kilowog. And obviously you can tell this is Bernard Chang because it's his version of Kilowog. And Kyle Rayner is on the cover.
Yep. And obviously, if we didn't mention it, Hal Jordan is not on the cover.
No. And the cover has Teen Lantern poking a Guardian in the chest with a bunch of attitude, which... I find a little hard to swallow. I find a lot about this hard to swallow. Needless to say, this is a hard pass for me, a very hard pass. Looks like they're going down the road of the Green Lantern power battery exploding once again. This must be the dozenth time in the last 15, 20 years that the power battery's gone dark. The whole thing with Teen Lantern having Krona's Gauntlet. We already know the Krona's Gauntlet was destroyed, so I don't know where this one's coming from. It's, I don't know, just a bunch of trying to keep it family friendly.
So
struggling a little bit there, but you know,
that's okay. A side note to this, I mean, and I'm not very much looking forward to it myself. I mean, those are three Green Lanterns that I don't genuinely care about like I do with like Hal Jordan and you know, Jessica Cruz but like in the same vein, you got Geoffrey Thorne, who's writing this book moving forward, which just so happens to be an African American author. But then you got three African American Green Lanterns as your major part of your team, I guess you would say, leaders of the Guardian. I said, what did it say? The Guardians of what? Universe or something?
Oh, they basically said, the Guardians are going to be meeting up with something called the United. Where let me find that part of the clip again. It's in flux. The United Planets, the newly formed United Planets, and the Guardians of the Universe hold a summit.
Well, I mean, I don't know. I mean, whatever. I mean, you and I both know that if we look back at probably how many episodes we've talked, it's like we've given up trying to understand what kind of which way the wind's going to blow when it comes to DC. For that matter, when it comes to Warner Brothers. For that matter, when it comes to AT&T, who owns everything. You know, it's just like you don't know which way it's going to go. I mean, and again, it does a discredit to a lot of the fans out there because then you got. Grant's run on the Green Lantern that's coming to an end soon. And then, you're left in flux with a lot of fandom that doesn't know if they're going to be able to read about who they want to read about. I mean, bonus to Kyle Rayner being shown on the cover. I mean, bonus to all of them being shown on the cover for that matter. It doesn't mean they're going to show up in the book.
Right, exactly. That's very much, very, very true. Good point, Phil.
Yeah. So, but by that same thread, if you think about it, if you're not going to include Hal Jordan on the cover, what is it a tell of? I I mean, you got a lot of Hal Jordan fans out there, man. If he's not showing up on the cover, or no allusion to the fact that he's even going to be in the book, I mean, I don't know. I see a lot of people that are going to drop the title, and that'll reflect on the writer.
I have no doubt that Hal will not be in the book.
Well, yeah, considering what we talked about last time and stuff, I that could be the whole part and parcel of the reason why he's not even included on the cover with all the rest of the lanterns, and everybody else is on there, let alone Simon Bass. But I don't know. I don't know.
I think the car's off the wheels. Where this is going completely downhill in terms of the direction they want to go in. I don't think they have any idea what they are doing at this point. I'm already seeing people commenting saying, "Not buying it. I pass. No, thank you."
Well, and not only that, man. If you think about it like this, they're not even giving us any they're not giving any. That's been my biggest beef with Warner Brothers, and this goes back to something I said on Twitter earlier today, this whole I stand by Ray Fisher thing. At some point, if you're Warner Brothers, put out a public statement, you know what I mean? Make a comment, or at least do something about the issue, and I said this in my tweet. Number one, for the actor, number two, for the company base, for the way you look in the public eye, and number three, for the love of God, so that hashtag goes away. I mean, it's all over Twitter. I stand with Ray Fisher. Right? I get it. I get that drives momentum, but this is Warner Brothers Pictures we're talking about here, which they don't have a good track record when it comes to their how they work, how they do things. I mean, the whole Whedon fiasco with Snyder. I mean, the whole, touch and go about their movie films. I mean, everybody always talks about it, and we might as well clear the air with this. Aquaman did good. Wonder Woman did good. Everything else, everybody on all the time. Oh, I'm sorry. I should have said that.
I'll edit it out. We'll
edit it out. So, but
you'll hear a bird squawking when it's the thing.
Right. But everybody does that to all those other films, and a lot of those other films revolved around controversy. Unfortunately, yeah. Aquaman was by itself; it did great. Wonder Woman and Patty Jenkins, both of them did fine. But everything else has just got this shroud over it, and I don't know what they're trying to do to contain it. But so you release the Snyder Cut and you please a lot of fans. But in the same token, you got your comic book, and I don't think they listen to their fans very much. That's the thing that worked well about Marvel, and I've said this before. They listen to their fans. Right. If their fan base knows what the hell it's talking about.
If they're only listening to Twitter, they're not getting their audience.
I mean, yeah, go to your source material, or go to your source material to create great source material. And this goes back to what I should have said at the very beginning. We haven't even gotten news about the Green Lantern series on HBO Max. Nobody's talking about that. No, Jeff Johns has been like some phantom. He's silent. He doesn't talk about anything anymore. It's just, I don't know. The way the whole company's been lately, if it wasn't for Green Lantern and some of the characters that I do really enjoy, I would honestly think about not even purchasing their content anymore. But I'm a diehard fan, and I have hope that I'm going to get one day. I'm going to get out of it what I think that they should do for their people, especially the ones that purchase their stuff. Yeah, and that's done. I'm done with my rant. That's all. I shouldn't have went on that hard of a rant, but I mean, my gosh, man, it's like they have PR. I even said that on my tweet. They have a PR. Put a public statement out there for people. People want to know what you're doing. We don't need to know everything, but Disney's been great at that. Just throwing out those little breadcrumbs with everybody.
Yeah, I just was reading it. I was reading this whole article just as we were getting ready to record because it literally had just come out. And I'm like, oh my word. Ugh.
Yeah. I was looking at it too, and I was getting ready to say, okay, well, what? And I'm surprised I didn't see it earlier. But then I was like, when you said it was new, I was like, oh, okay. Well, I must have picked up on it right when you did.
Yeah, Newsarama just posted it within the last hour, and I had been prepping for the episode and reviewing things and so on, so I wasn't keeping an eye on the news. And then I just happened to see something pop up on my Twitter feed, and like, oh no! And I went and looked, and I was like, oh really? They're going there? Ugh. Yikes! Which won't be the first time I say the word yikes tonight.
Well, but that's going to beg the question though. if we decide, I mean, we can't make that. I mean, that's going to be a tough decision to make. If we decide not to go with the title, what are we going to talk about?
We have old books we can talk about. I just because I'm not going to buy the book doesn't mean I'm not going to read the book.
Okay, so let's make a pact. You know, at least we should at least mention it in our podcast moving forward.
Yeah, okay, I got you. We're good. Yeah, I can abide by that.
We could put it in the footnote section if you want.
Also, there was XM Studios, which is an Asian company. Think of like Sideshow Collectibles. Does the really high quality statues. They have a Sinestro statue coming out. It's a little expensive. Now, when you do the conversion on price, and again, because you're buying it internationally, you've always got to deal with the conversion rate, but it's around $530. It's a beautiful looking statue. It's the parallax version of Sinestro, with the white streak through his hair, and he's actually like standing on top of Parallax, the entity.
It's awesome. It's completely awesome.
The shipping is pretty outrageous. I think when you calculate the shipping, it's close to $300 shipping. So it's a little crazy in the pricing. And this is it is the third product they've done though that's Green Lantern related. They did a Hal statue, which has Hal with this mech behind him with all these missiles coming out of it. And then they've got a Jessica Cruz statue with Jessica holding, I think it's an axe, a construct axe, if I recall. So this is their first product. It looks interesting. This Sinestro thing looks really beautiful. I just can't wrap my head around that kind of money unless they get a U.S. distributor for it.
So two things on the statue. He's got like a gray streak or a white streak on his head, huh?
Yeah. So he's got the white streak, like you see, when he merges with Parallax. He's got the Parallax entity. So he's got the Parallax version of his costume, with the yellow shoulder plate and the glowing thing in the center, and then he's got kind of that stripe not down the center of his head but just off center. He's got that white stripe. It looks really nice. It's about 20 inches tall. It's a 1/6 scale. Beautiful looking piece. It's just the shipping, when you look at the fact that the conversion rate is about $520, but then when you look at the shipping, it's about another $300 if you order it directly from them, and that just makes it a little hard to swallow if you're thinking you're going to spend close to $1,000 for this thing by the time it's said and done.
Well, and not only that, man, but when you go to their website, and people should really go check out their website. Because they got some pristine pieces. If you're a hardcore collector and you go through their website and you collect all their DC stuff, I guarantee you'd spend at least $10,000.
Oh, easily. They're the ones, last year everybody was talking about this statue that was Dark Side, and he was surrounded by the JLA, so it had Wonder Woman and Batman, and Hal's there with doing a ring blast and stuff. That statue is close to $3,000.
Yeah, I'm looking at him right now. I got some intense pieces on here, though.
Beautiful stuff. Just it's very expensive, and I would expect that Dark Side statue to be really expensive because it is so big.
Or did you see the other one where he's holding Superman's cape?
Yeah, just beautiful stuff. The problem is the shipping, because you're shipping it from there to here. They do have GFX distribution handles a lot of their stuff in the United States. And I see that they do have the Justice League versus Darkseid statue, and they have, I think they've got, I got to take a look and double check, but I'm pretty sure they have the Jessica Cruz one available. And I think they had
new.
They had the Hal one. Yeah, it looks like the first quarter of this year is when Jessica Cruz comes out. And it looks like that one's $250. Well, no, that's a deposit of $250. It's $480. And that's at least shipping from the U.S. if you go through this other FX distribution.
Bonus, though, is, bonus twice because, I just got my bonus from work that's supposed to be coming in next week. I wonder if I could talk my wife into, hey, Jessica Cruz would look good sitting right over there.
now the Hal statue is $800.
Yeah, I can't justify that.
But if you if you see the statue, you can see why, because it's a full size, not full size, not full scale. It's a 1/6 scale Hal, which looks really nice, but then he's got this big mech behind him with all these missiles firing out. So it's a rather large piece. It's still 1/6 scale, but it's a big, bold piece.
They're all beautiful. I mean, the Wonder Woman one, the Aquaman Rebirth one is I mean, they're just all extremely well done. And even got Transformers on there too.
Yeah. If you look at GFX distribution, I'll put a link to that in the show notes. They do the U.S. distribution, and so you kind of get around some of the shipping issues. I don't know what their shipping cost is, but it's got to be less than shipping it from I think Singapore is where it's coming out of. But at any rate, we have a comic book to talk about and a Know Your Core segment. So why don't we pause, and we will be back in a few minutes, and we'll talk about some future state stuff.
All right.
Listen up, Lanterns. It's time you took the oath with Green Lantern John Stewart. In brightest day, in blackest night, don't let the podcast of Oa escape your sight. Let those who worship evil's might beware my power. Green Lantern's light.
Hello, fellow Owens. Happy New Year, and welcome back to another Know Your Core segment. This week, I thought we'd pay homage to our one of our featured Green Lanterns in the Future State book, Nort. That's right, Nort. But however, Nort goes by the real name Nort Espelande Knee Smasher. His first appearance was in Justice League International number 10, created by Keith Giffen, J.M. DeMatteis, and Kevin Maguire. So his origin story is kind of lengthy, but to summarize, Nort is believed to be the child of the great Green Lantern Newman Noggs, and that Nort's supposed parents were paid to raise a child until his 21st birthday. Nort's poor self-image didn't help, and he was branded as an idiot. After bringing home a failing report card, Nort was sent to his room for 6 months without supper. He took that time to leave home and explore the world. The details of the trip still remain a mystery. But when he returned to school, he tried hard to fit in, but he couldn't. He became an object of ridicule, and he decided he would seek out the Green Lantern Newman. There he was told tales of his uncle's celebrated career as Green Lantern and teacher. Uncle Newman knew his nephew was an imbecile, but he also knew he had to give Nort a future. To this end, he visited the Guardians, and he used his great influence to pull some strings and have Nort admitted into the Corps. And that's how the story supposedly went. And there you have it, another prime member of the Green Lantern Corps, Nort, which we're going to talk about here soon.
This is Salak, Green Lantern of Sector 1418, and you are receiving the podcast of Oa.
The podcast of Oa.
All right, Phil. So this week sees the release of the first of two Future State Green Lantern books. This first one, both of these books are anthologies, so they're a little oversized. They carry a $5.99 price tag. This first one, both books are anchored by a 2-part John Stewart story, written by future Green Lantern writer Geoffrey Thorne. And this one has 2 other backup stories, one with Jessica Cruz and one with Guy Gardner. So I want to break it down and go through each story separately. But before we dive into it, if you were to rank these stories, just to get a feel for it, why don't you tell me what ones you liked best to worst? So what was your most favorite to least favorite?
Mine?
Yeah.
So I like Jessica Cruz's. That was my first. I thought it was cool. I liked seeing Alyssa Drax, and I liked her run in with the I like how she was stranded on the battery and she had her run in with the Sinestro Corps. I like seeing them guys again. Second would be the Guy Gardner. I thought it was humorous, and it had a lot of like throwbacks to like the bar, Warriors Bar and stuff. And my least favorite was probably the John Stewart one. I didn't feel like it served any purpose.
Gotcha. Okay. So, we're similar. I like the Guy Gardner story better than the Jessica story. And obviously no secret, I'm not really the world's biggest Jessica Cruz fan, but my problems with the story weren't so much because it was Jessica, but there were things about the story that made me like it less than the Guy story. And then the John story is a distant third. And it's interesting, before we dive into the three stories, I've been trying to keep an eye on people's response online. And it's really interesting to see some of the responses, if there's anybody talking about it. And by that, I mean, for example, if I go to the Blog of Oa Facebook group, not one person has, in the 2 days since this book come out, even mentioned it, which I thought was odd. And people don't think it's because it's a group I run. We have a lot of fans that like a lot of different things. You don't have to be anti whatever or pro for a particular character to be in the Facebook group. We have people who everybody's got their favorite. It's a very diverse group of people, but no one has talked about it at all. Over on comic book resources message boards, a couple people have talked about it in the Jon Stewart thread. 2 people seemed to like it, which were no surprise considering who they were. And a couple people came in and said, didn't care for it. On the Future State thread, people were saying, for the most part, which I thought was interesting. Over on Reddit, primarily all negative responses. On the GreenLanternCorps.com message boards, there's been no conversation about it whatsoever. So it's interesting to see kind of the lack of conversation. It's interesting to me to see that there's nobody talking about it, because usually whenever there's a book out, people are talking about it. At least, even if they don't like it, they're talking about it. If they like it, they're raving about it. It all depends on the reactions. It's just odd to see no reactions. Now, if you go to comicbookroundup.com, they are, for all intents and purposes, think of it as the Rotten Tomatoes of comic books. So they have a number of reviewers, and full disclosure, Blog of O is one of the reviewers that they pull up my reviews in as part of their aggregate for critics. But so they have critics that they pull in their reviews and aggregate their score to get an overall score. And then they have people who have accounts and they do their own little reviews as a user. And when you go to this book, it's interesting. The places that are getting their books for free are very favorable. And those that are paying for it out of their own pocket, not so much. It's interesting to see.
That.
Yeah, it's interesting to see. Yeah. When you look at the user reviews, it got a 4.0 out of 10.
Ooh, ouch.
Yeah. And again, in terms of my own review, I gave it a 5 out of 10. So I liked it better than the average reader who has an account on Comic Book Roundup. But at any rate, so anthology series starts out with the Jon Stewart story. So let's go with that one first. So we'll even though we like them in different orders, let's just do them in chronological order. So the Jon.
We should do the lead in. Let's do the lead into this.
Okay.
And here's where it starts.
Gotcha. Go ahead.
The multiverse has been saved from the brink of destruction. With victory comes new possibilities. As the triumph of our heroes shakes loose the very fabric of time and space, from the ashes of death metal comes new life for the multiverse, and a glimpse into the unwritten worlds of tomorrow. Here we are, future state. All right, man, I'm good.
So this is Tom Rainey and Geoff Thorne doing the story. This first part, it's The Last Lanterns, and it features John Salak and Nort, which great job in choosing Nort for your spotlight. And the whole part of the story, I struggle to find a story in this, to be quite honest with you. And again, I'm checking my bias at the door because I think the writer is a steaming pile of crap, but whatever. But looking at this, just looking at the story, it's difficult because you're dropped in the middle of a confrontation that you really don't know how it came about. You're assuming that as the story unfolds, the Khund are going to this planet and they're kind of going to lay waste, and Jon Stewart's there with a band of people trying to protect them. That's about all you can really get out of it. And John obviously has a different look. The look we saw with the dreadlocks, and he's got the energy sword, and he's got a gun, and Salak's got 4 guns, one for each hand. And then Nort, has gone from the plucky sidekick to, as I called him in my review, Nort Baka.
That's a good one. I like it.
He's a roided up version of Nort. No comedy relief whatsoever. I'd be hard pressed to say he's actually Nort because he's completely out of character in this whole thing. If you were thinking about all the lanterns that might survive when the power battery goes out, Nort would not be on that list. There's nothing in the entire history of that character that even would allude to him being someone who could do what he does here or would even act that way.
Yeah, true.
But there's the whole story, and again, I use the term story loosely. The whole part of this section of this book is just one big prolonged action sequence. There's no real story here. When you look at taking... First of all, I have a problem with taking the power battery and once again destroying it. We've been down that road. It's become such an overused trope. But when you do, if you're forced down that dynamic, if you're a writer, probably the smart thing to do is to look at, well, how can I showcase the character? What goes on with this person when they don't have the ring to rely on? Their true character, their true nature has to come out to make up the difference. And in this, John is just barking orders throughout the entire issue. There's nothing here other than an action sequence. This is like just watching an action scene from a movie with no context. You don't care about any of the characters because you don't know who they are. And the artwork, I said the word yikes earlier. I'm saying yikes to this whole story. The heads are out of proportion. Like I said, the proportions are all wrong in this at all. Jon Stewart really doesn't look like Jon Stewart. We know Geoffrey Thorne likes Idris Elba as Jon Stewart, and this is like they drew Idris Elba as Jon Stewart.
That's so true. You're so accurate. I didn't even think about that until you said it. Right when you said Idris Elba, I was like, "Oh, no, that makes sense now."
And then there's one weird scene where there's kind of a flashback, and you see Kilowog, and you can't tell if he's missing his right arm because of the way the angle plays out. But I can't tell why there's a flashback there, other than the "Did you plan for it" line that John has asked. Does that trigger a memory? Because Kilowog doesn't say that, so I'm not sure what led to that flashback. But
that brings up the problems I have with the story. I mean, I'm okay with a storyteller, but what I'm interested in. Okay, so I've read Death Metal. I know you didn't partake in any of that. I want to know what happens. How did he get here? Okay, all of a sudden the thing I have is there's no context, right?
Right.
So
right.
It says Last Lanterns. Okay, that's fine. I get that. But okay, can you at least explain in the story why? I mean, why don't they have their rings? Why isn't the power battery? Why? Because they didn't even say in here anything about the power battery destroyed, did they?
No, they don't. They don't really say anything about it. And the funny thing is the backup stories do a much better job, even though they have fewer pages, to kind of give you an idea what's going on.
And that's what I mean. So you'd think with Jon Stewart being your lead man on your book coming out, you'd at least give some allusion to the fact, okay, so why are these guys showing up without their power rings? None of their uniforms are on, and how did they get there to begin with?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's the part I have a problem with. So it's like jumping from point A to Z and missing every entire letter of the alphabet in between.
But this is one big vowel movement. But no, it's interesting because we know from things that have come from outside this book that this story takes place in the year 2035. So we do know it's somewhere down the road. We don't really know what's happened. You almost assume if you didn't have the meta knowledge of reading the stories that have been on Newsarama and CBR and whatever, you really wouldn't get too much of an idea other than that whole panel with Kilowog where he talks about, told the Guardians the dark sectors were poozer bait. So you could almost assume when they went to a dark sector, you might imply, okay, the rings don't work here. Okay, I guess I can go there. But if I'm left to my own devices, that's all I get out of it. And I guess you don't really need to know more than that, but you're right. It's very jarring to open this book up and not get any context. The other two writers with fewer pages do a much better job of letting you get a feel for how did my characters get here.
Well, not only that, the time sequences, I mean, they even in Jessica Cruz's story, she talks about how long she's been there for,
Mm-hmm.
and what she's been dealing with or whatever, and how she, I guess, more, for lack of a better words, retrofit this whole battery she's been living in for a year, it looks like, or longer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's just such an odd. Like, John's got other people in his squad, but we don't know who they are yet. So again, I don't care what happens to them. And the whole thing with Nort, I'm sorry, I just have a real hard time looking at Nort as being some ferocious beast, because he's anything but. It just, the whole story to me it was just boring. You spent all these pages, you had the lion's share of the pages, and all you did is one big fight scene. It's
well, next the God in Red is coming.
Oh boy.
So in that same vein, how many books for Green Lantern are there for Future State? Is there 2?
Just 2. One this month and one next month.
Okay,
go ahead.
Next month is going to be a continuation of these 3 stories, the same anthology?
Nope. The next issue will be this continuation of the John Stewart story, and then the 2 backups, one will be a Hal story and one will be a Teen Lantern story.
Gotcha.
So the Jessica Cruz and Guy Gardner stories, who we both feel are better than the main story, have fewer pages and they're one and done.
Okay. Well, I can honestly argue the fairness in that, but I won't go down that rabbit hole.
And the comment thread I read from comments is people who were kind of willing to give the writer a little bit of a pass. We're looking at this story of, okay, how good is the main series going to be? This is my one chance to get an idea of how this person's going to write Green Lantern. And a lot of them have said, ugh, this is an incredibly boring story filled with tropes, characters I don't care about. If this is what we're doing for Green Lantern, granted it's before the rings go dead, maybe, this is not terribly interesting. This doesn't bode well. And that's a scary thing.
And if I had to choose out of these 3 stories in this anthology, which one attracted me to where I'd want to read more, and this is not, I'm not showing any bias here, it'd be the Jessica Cruz one. Mm-hmm. Only because, the John Stewart one didn't offer me anything, and it's not a story that I really see like it's going to develop. I don't know what the point was. Jessica's felt like it had some kind of point, especially because you include the byproduct of the Sinestro Corps.
Right.
Where we finally get to see them.
Thorne has the luxury of having 2 issues to tell his story and more pages, but he didn't do anything in these pages to make me care. The Jessica Cruz story, as much as I'm not really a big Jessica Cruz fan, it was an interesting story. There were elements to it. It was self-contained. There was actually a cohesive plot. I don't know. To me, this does not bode well. And I already knew, I was not going to buy the Geoff Thorne book to begin with, just out of principle. But this kind of cements for me, that's the right decision. Don't support it, because the only thing DC understands is how much money is spent on something. And if you buy it, even if you're just giving it a chance, you're endorsing the product by buying it. I'm not going to endorse it, because this first installment just verifies for me, this guy is not. He might be a good writer. I don't know that. I've never read any of his other work, but this, like I said, yikes.
Ladies and gentlemen, Myron is not happy.
It's just, I try to give books. I gave this book a better review score than I gave either of the 2 Larfleeze issues I bought, and I ditched on the Larfleeze book. I gave a Hal Jordan team up with Plastic Man written by Marv Wolfman a 0. So I gave this one a better score than all 3 of those books. So, I've tried to keep my bias checked at the door and try to just look at it as here's what's being presented to me. And I wouldn't care whose name is on the credits. This story's not good.
Yeah, and that's fair.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that like a lot of people vary in opinion, and that's okay. I wasn't blown away by the issue by any means. It didn't deflate me as I thought it was going to. And that's only because there was a story about Jessica Cruz, and I completely adore Lissa Drax, and I love seeing her back in here. And mainly because that story, it felt like had kind of a natural tie-in to the Sinestro Corps. And it kind of felt like, okay, well, this story could go to the fact that the Green Lanterns lost their rings, and the Sinestro Corps is taken over.
Right.
I mean, that has an element to it that would be appealing to me.
I mean, it's not original. It's happened before, but at the same time, the writer's figuring out a way. Well, how do I use the elements I've got to work in? I've got to work in this universe. How can I tell an interesting story? And this story the Jessica Cruz story is at least interesting. You got Jessica Cruz on board a sector house, which is interesting because we haven't seen the sector houses used in a very long time.
And it's a cool looking sector house too.
Yeah, and we haven't seen them in a very long time. So I really applaud the writer for taking what people are already familiar with and finding a way, well, how do I use these toys in a way that's going to be familiar to the reader, yet still tell a good story and fit in with the framework of this is in the future a little bit. So I really give him all kudos for that. The writer is Ryan Cady. And I thought Sammy Basri's art was nice.
Yeah, it's clean. It's a good clean art.
But basically, it's interesting. The story is called The Taking of Sector 123, which is a riff on The Taking of Pelham 123. But this is more, to me, Home Alone in space.
It kind of felt that way.
And I don't mean that in a bad way. This is Jessica is in a sector house, and the Sinestro Corps have discovered the sector house and like, what can we scrap off of this? What can we salvage and use? Because with the Green Lanterns gone, we're now going to be the dominant force in the universe again, like the last time the Green Lanterns disappeared. And so you've got Jessica there, and you find out that Jessica has, since she has no ring that's working, she's been using the resources of the sector house to try to do her job as a Green Lantern. So she's trying to negotiate peace and do what she can do from afar. She's almost like Oracle in a way, which is kind of a neat twist. It looks like, from the character design, she's, how do I say this? I don't want this to sound wrong, but she's a little off model from the way she normally appears. Not in a bad way. I'm not being negative about it, but that she is almost a little unrecognizable.
Well, and not only that, I guess I could say that she's come a long way and she has a little bit more confidence, right, maybe. But, even by that same vein, it seems like they've lost that whole thread with her fighting her anxiety and whatnot, which has always been my biggest beef about the writers and her characterization.
Right. The other thing is we know that this story takes place a little bit in the future too. We don't know if it's taking place at the same time. I get the impression it's before what's happening in the John Stewart story. I get the impression it's a little bit earlier on, and that Jessica, it's like weeks or months since the rings have gone dark, and she's trying to negotiate her life, basically trapped. She can't get off of this station. She's stuck here for the rest of her life, and so unless something happens or somebody encounters it, and along comes people to maybe potentially help out, and it's Lissa Drac, Lowe, and Ugg-1 from the Sinestro Corps.
Ugg-1, man, what a character! Yeah,
and it's kind of interesting from that standpoint, in that Jessica is, she has come a long way. She's had to cope and adapt and change. She's had to really learn how to deal with her fears. The social anxiety kind of drips away because there's nobody for her to interact with, right. But she's also trying to, you got to push down the fear that, hey, I'm out here stranded. This is like the Martian. You're stranded. You've only got what's on the station to survive with.
And she does a fairly good job. She takes out Ugg-1.
That was kind of where that's where the story just went down for me, because I had a hard time believing anybody, no matter who, would be able to take out two ring bearers. You've got two people with some of the most powerful weapons in the universe on their finger, and they're taken out like chumps. I thought they were kind of dumbed down.
Well, but also, if you think about it, the Sinestro Corps, most of them aren't the brightest crayons in the box.
Yeah, I can see that. I just, if these were new recruits, I'd have an easier time with it, but these aren't new recruits. These are, at one time the Sinestro Corps were some of the fiercest enemies to fight the Green Lanterns, and one Green Lantern would have a hard time taking down a Sinestro Corps member, let alone two, and a Green Lantern without a ring. So, it was a little Mary Sue-y to me.
That's fair.
But, that said, the one main criticism that people had with this story, when I was looking at what people's comments were, was that they felt that Jessica, regardless of anything going on, she would never embrace a yellow power ring, that was not true to her character or her journey. And I don't know as if I feel that way. What about you, Phil? Do you feel that kind of pushes her in the wrong direction?
Well, I mean, I don't know. I'm not an expert on the character, but I'll say enough to know that, like, if you got a character that's built off social anxiety, and then you go through, I mean, Odyssey, taking on Darkseid, dying, coming back, I mean, and countless whatever measures she's went through. I mean, you'd think by that measure, at that point, you've overcome all that. You wouldn't let fear be the one thing to bring it back. You know what I mean? Or
right.
Or basically to regress.
Is Jessica really somebody who's capable of instilling fear?
I don't know if she is or not. I mean, and it does on the last panel. I mean, it doesn't allude to that. It just says welcome to the Sinestro Corps, and it shows the ring floating there, but it's not on her finger just yet. So there could be an opportunity. Maybe she doesn't take it. But I will say this: if she does take the ring, it's going to be cool. I'm interested to see what they're going to do with her.
I mean, it does say you have the ability to instill great fear, and I think that's where people are a little upset. People that really love the character are like, Jessica Cruz would never instill fear in anybody.
Yeah, because she was always afraid of everything.
Right. And so they feel like it's kind of like you're violating the character, and it really does imply, because she's got a Sinestro power battery in one hand, and the ring is floating just above her other, and the logo, and it ends with the Sinestro Corps logo behind the words "the end," and it even says all you need to do is reach out and take it. It's implied that she's going to take it. You're right, though. She could in a moment. This is the moment, and it's almost a bit of a tease in that, well, maybe she doesn't take it because she realizes, I can't do that to people. I can't instill fear in them because I know it's to be crippled by fear. So I'm not going to be the one to do that. Maybe that will be what happens, but the story doesn't imply that.
Well, I hope at the very least that somewhere down the line they follow up with this story. I mean,
right.
I hate to see the story just end right here and we don't get some kind of, all right, so what happens?
Right.
Does anything happen?
Well,
is nobody going to write about it?
And I guess when you look at that last panel where she's basically being restrained by a Sinestro Corps power battery, but she's able to reach up and grab the Sinestro Corps battery and hit Lissa Drac with it and distract her. That was one of the kind of moments like, really? How can you break the construct?
Of all people. Yeah.
Well, right. How can you break that construct? Just so to me, I had you can suspend your disbelief to a certain point. I had a hard time thinking of any Lantern really being able to overcome 3 Sinestro Corps members with nothing but what they could find on the station to help them. To me, it was a little far-fetched. But if you go beyond that, I can understand why people might be upset that you've got Jessica, who's probably the last character in the Green Lantern Corps, the last of the Lanterns that would be willing to embracing fear. So I get their criticism of that.
I'd be curious to see what her costume looks like.
Yeah. We'll see if this gets picked up on. You don't know whether this is a plot thread that's being laid for the series. Who knows? We'll see.
And there comes who knows. I mean, you say that a lot. Who knows?
Who knows? So the last story, which was my favorite, was the Book of Guy, and Clayton Henry does the artwork. Who's familiar to us. He's done some Green Lantern artwork before. A little bit of a coloring mistake in the beginning where they don't have the stripe down the side of Guy's pants, and he's got white boots, but it doesn't last long. It's written by Ernie Altbacher, who, if people don't recognize the name, he wrote a number of episodes of Green Lantern, the animated series.
Oh,
and
cool.
For me, both this story and the Jessica story, what they both did successfully was they concentrated on the character. What is this person like without the power ring on? They're the same person with the ring on, but without the ring on, you don't have the distraction of somebody wearing the most powerful weapon in the universe on their finger. And so their true character has the opportunity to shine. And in both of these stories, it did. And in this situation, Guy's story is the lightest of the 3. I think it's the most entertaining of the 3, but it's not out of character for what happens. The humor is never at anybody's expense. I love the dynamic between Badge and Guy here in the beginning. And then you see what happens when the ring goes dark. It's funny because this is the one story that actually shows you what happens, and it's the last one in the book.
Yeah, that's a good point. Because Jessica's just kind of like did like a time sequence where she's been on her own for a while. This one takes place as the event occurs.
Right.
Or
And
whatever event that is. Anyway.
You get the idea, the Jessica story gives you enough information that you can kind of tell what's going on. You know that the rings kind of went dark and she's struggling on her own. There's some context there. In this case, it's quite literal. Guy is hovering 1 second and falling on his rear end to the next because his ring just went out. And the one thing I didn't talk about in the Jon Stewart story was you've got in the Jessica Cruz story and the Guy story, both of those stories understand that, the power rings do more than just let you fly and make constructs. They also translate. Wasn't it interesting in the Jon Stewart story that everybody spoke English?
Well, and then not only that, both the Jessica story and this story at least have some kind of resonance to the Green Lantern mythology in its entirety.
Right.
I mean, because this one you got, Guy Gardner wearing his Warriors shirt.
Sure. But
Jessica had the core members and stuff, and Jon Stewart didn't have any kind of allusion whatsoever to anything.
Right. But you can understand and you can accept that Jessica can understand the Sinestro Corps members because they are wearing power rings, and so the rings, their rings are doing the translation. In this one, you understand Guy's ring is doing the translating, and they actually go so far as to show you when it's in the alien language, and when the ring goes bad, suddenly that becomes a plot point, which to me is very intelligent writing.
It is good because you can't understand anything that they're saying. They can't understand him.
In the Jon Stewart story, everybody's talking English.
Interesting.
So.
You calling it out.
Is it because he's been in space so long he's learned to speak their language? But I didn't think that the Kuns and all the other races all speak the same languages to begin with. But, I understand that can get in the way of telling your story. But at the same time, if you're a smart writer, you find ways to get around that.
Yeah.
Anyway, back to the Guy Gardner story. He's there because they've got these two races fighting over this piece of space junk. And when he gets there and the ring goes out, they look at him as, hey, somebody fell from the stars. And so now he's put in this place where he can't understand the language because he doesn't have a ring to do the translation. He's in his Warriors t-shirt. And what does he do? He's got these two warring factions and he can't talk to them. And with a small number of pages, he uses time shifting in time to show how the story progresses over a number of years. And you see how Guy is helping these people overcome their own adversity to each other. At the same time, he's leaving some indelible fingerprints on their society.
It's kind of cute. I mean, because he's Prophet Guy. They keep calling him Prophet Guy. And it shows the sequence how he learns their language because of the years timestamps.
Yeah, I love
1 year, 5 years.
I like the 5 years APG after Prophet Guy. And that whole scene where he's like, I can't emphasize this enough. Do not kill anyone because they like something different than I do. Which, and then the guy says, well, you clearly said the only jelly worth having is grape. Hence, people that don't like grape jelly are heretics. And then he says in English, because you can see that the little lines are outside of the text, so he's no longer speaking in their language. Note to self: leave state dinners after the second flagon of beer. It's a lighthearted story. There's humor in there, but it's character-driven humor, not the guffaw, kind of Three Stooges humor. It's all very well written. I mean, you see guys teaching them how to make a foosball table. He's trying to open warriors up on this planet. And there's humor throughout. And he's winning them over. He's getting them to put aside their differences and actually work together. And he's so happy. Now he's like, oh my gosh, we're here. And he's standing there with a tear running down his cheek and everybody's celebrating. And then Lobo shows up and spoils the party.
What a great cameo, though.
Oh my gosh, it was so funny. Because you started to see some dissent amongst the people. And you can even see how he's kind of impacted their clothing styles. But they're starting to kind of argue amongst themselves that, he's not right, so on and so forth. There's a new prophet. And the new prophet turns out to be Lobo. And it ends with Guy putting his head in his hands saying, I was so darn close.
Well, did you see what Lobo says, though? Prophet, he spells it with the F-I-T.
Yeah. It's a fun story.
It was good.
Managed to tell, and let's see, 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 pages. So in 10 pages, a very cohesive story with a lot of heart, a lot of character. I love that one of the three. Now, would I buy the book for that story, no, I would not spend dollars for that story.
No.
And there's not enough. The Jessica Cruz was okay to me, but there's not enough in this book. I would not spend the money to buy this issue, to be honest.
No. Well, I wouldn't do it because it's got it doesn't have Hal Jordan in it.
Well, I mean, I would. I loved Tales of the Green Lantern Corps. I love Green Lantern Corps. I love the Green Lantern Corps book that when it had John and Guy in it and Kyle. I enjoyed those books. It doesn't have to have Hal in it for me to enjoy it, but it's got to be good. And I didn't find the book good enough to warrant $6.
I just don't understand why they can't make a Green Lantern Corps book and make it an anthology. You know what I mean? Like every month. Or every monthly title, an anthology book. I mean, you could tell so many stories. Yeah.
I could go bi-monthly. I mean, they're doing that with Far Sector. That's a bi-monthly book. I could see an anthology book on the Green Lantern Corps bi-monthly. Sure. Especially if you made it more pages like this.
Right.
Because you could have one longer story, one main story, and 2 backups every other month. I would buy that in a heartbeat.
Sure. Well, so maybe we should write in or mail in. No, they won't listen to the fans anyway.
They don't care. To be honest, if you dislike what they're doing, then you're the problem. So
and that's where it comes down to. You're the problem.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. They're really not willing to listen to constructive criticism.
Right. Yeah, I'd agree with that. But they don't want to listen to anything. No, they're worried about the bottom line.
Yeah, they're very defensive.
Yeah.
But at any rate, so that was Future State number 1. I full disclosure, I did not buy the issue. I made a promise that I was not going to support it, and I'm not. I was able to read the issue, and if I'm given the opportunity to read the issue without spending money on it, I'll buy it. I mean, I'll read it, not buy it, but I'll read it, and I'll be honest in my criticism.
We gave it a fair shake.
Sure, sure.
We're gonna have books we're not gonna like, right. And we're gonna have books we do like,
right?
And there's nothing wrong with that.
We talked about one of the Gerard Jones books in the last episode. I despise what that person did, but I'm going to look at the book objectively because this book was written before those things came to light. I'm going to read the book objectively, and I'm not going to be any more harshly critical than I am of anything else. If you went back and looked at my reviews of the Laura Flees book, and I know the Marv Wolfman Plastic Man Hal Jordan team up book, that book didn't survive the move from Blogger to WordPress. I've got to manually recreate it. I've got the actual article somewhere, but I gave that a 0. I was brutal on that book.
I remember the cover of that book. That's all I remember about that book.
That was Plastic Man and Hal Jordan fighting space ducks. That's all I'll say. That was a yikes. That's what that was. This was just a yikes. So that's our opinions on Future State Green Lantern number 1. If you guys have some comments you want to share, please do. We'd love to talk about it. Maybe we're missing something. I don't think we are, but we could be. So let us know.
I mean, I think we've been reading it long enough to where we'd pick out if we're missing something. I think it's just our point of view on something that just, doesn't mesh well with the direction that they're going with the characters.
Yeah.
Yeah, whatever.
All right.
Future State.
So let's take a quick pause. My power ring is blinking, so I think we got some incoming transmissions, and awesome. we will check in on that in a moment.
Prepare for a spine-tingling, nerve-shattering podcast featuring all your favorite monsters. You won't believe your ears when you listen to Monster Kid Radio. Hear your host, Derek M. Cook, and his ever-rotating stable of guests discuss your favorite classic and sometimes not-so-classic monster movies. Subscribe to Monster Kid Radio through iTunes or Stitcher, or visit monsterkidradio.net before the next weekly episode of Monster Kid Radio. Go through the archives for interviews with Sarah Karloff, Victoria Price, and Joel Hodgson. Listen to the discussions about movies like Creature from the Black Lagoon, Island of Terror, and King Kong. And don't forget convention coverage from Monster Bash and the H.P. Lovecraft Film Festival. classic monsters, modern talk, and the head of Rondo Hatton. Only on Monster Kids Radio.
So our Power Ring is telling us we've got some incoming messages, but before we get to that, there's something I wanted to talk about earlier in the show, and I didn't, and that was, I'm wondering if any of you folks that are out there listening, if your comic shops have been having problems getting their books from DC. I've been to my comic shop 3 times since the week of Christmas, and my shop has not gotten any books from DC Comics since the week of the 20th. The week of the 20th of December, he got no books, and he hasn't gotten any books since then. And hasn't been able to reach anybody. And I don't know if that's one of the reasons why we're seeing all these reprints for Future State is because they didn't print enough copies to meet their orders, or what the story might be. But my store has not gotten a DC book in almost a month. It'll be over a month next week. And this guy, and again, I live in a small community, small shop. DC makes up a fair percentage of his sales, and he's got no product to sell in almost a month. So I'm interested if anybody else is having any of those kind of issues with your stores. I'd just be curious to know. But anyway, Power Ring has some recordings for us. So Power Ring, why don't you go ahead and play the first message?
Our first message is from Shadow of Batman. His comment about our last episode comes from YouTube. Transmitting in 3, 2, 1.
Thanks for reviewing Spectre number 12. It's one of my favorite Christmas stories. In my opinion, J.M. DeMatteis was a very underrated Hal Jordan and Green Lantern writer. Will World and the Spectre run were both quite good. And I was quite pleased that Grant Morrison had brought it back in his run, even if it was a small mention.
Shadow Batman, thank you so much for your comment via YouTube. Spectre was a good run. I think it was underappreciated at the time. I think there were a fair number of people who were like, ew, Hal Jordan is Spectre, where's that going to go? But DeMatteis made it really interesting. It was a very intellectual book, that's for sure. And Will World, say that 5 times fast, Will World was also really good. And I agree, J.M. DeMatteis is an underrated writer, period, as far as I'm concerned. And it was neat to see Grant Morrison kind of make reference to all of that. I thought that was kind of a hoot the way that he did it. What about you, Phil?
No, that's really cool. I liked when he was Spectre. I thought it was a good, like, I don't know, like a redemption story for Hal Jordan. I mean, it's like, he's been through a lot. Everybody knows it who knows Hal Jordan. He's been through, Parallax. He's been just about everything. Not so much as Kyle Rayner has been everything, but like he's been through a lot. And I thought the Spectre run really kind of changed him as a character, but he was still this is going to sound kind of like redundant, but he was still the same when he came back from the character, but it also did change him in a certain way.
Yeah.
And I thought it was interesting how they took the character and they kept him in that kind of role until he did return. I thought it was kind of a neat seg into what happened with Final Night and how he died and saved everything and, sacrificed himself for the ultimate cause. And, to me, that would be a Hal Jordan character would do that, So I always enjoyed it. I thought it was cool. And that particular issue was fun to read when we did our Christmas special. I got a kick out of doing that.
It's interesting when you go back and look at Day of Judgment. Originally, and that was also written by Jeff Johns, by the way. Did you know that, this is kind of a little known fact, that Hal Jordan was originally not the first choice to be the Spectre?
No, I didn't know that. Who was the first choice?
Originally, Jeff Johns wanted to make the Enchantress the Spectre.
I don't think it would have had the same kind of feel to it.
His original plot for the book, for that series, was that Hal was still going to come back from purgatory, but he was just going to be a human without a ring, and that was his first step. He had started thinking about, well, how can I get Hal Jordan back with a power ring, and that was the first piece of it. And he never said this is what I want to do, but he was going to bring Hal back to the living, and then eventually maybe somewhere down the road he could be given the power ring again. But that was his original story, was to make the Enchantress the Spectre, and to make Spectre something that would be perhaps a little bit more evil and harder. So it would almost turn the Spectre into more of a villain in a way, because it would be kind of the dark side merging with the Spectre, which could have been interesting, I guess.
Yeah, really cool. Will World, I haven't read that in quite some time.
Yeah, I haven't either. It was an interesting story, a little trippy. If you like the Morrison stuff, you would like Will World. Basically, think of it as Hal had to take a test as he's training to be a Green Lantern, or in his early days, and he actually has to go inside the power ring, and he has an adventure inside of there. It's pretty cool. Heady stuff and trippy stuff.
Yep.
All right, Power Ring, go ahead and give us our next message.
The second and last comment comes from Dander93. He left a very nice review on iTunes. Transmitting in 3, 2, 1.
Myron and Phil are a necessary part of any Green Lantern fan's experience. These two are extremely knowledgeable, and maintain a positive outlook which helps during the COVID-19 lockdown. I recommend this podcast to every Green Lantern fan I meet.
All right, thanks, Power Ring, and thanks for the comment, Dandor93 at iTunes. I wouldn't say that I fall in the category of extremely knowledgeable when it comes to Green Lantern. That's more Myron than it is myself, and he can be modest all he wants about it, and he can snicker all he wants about it. But Myron has a vast amount of information pertaining to Green Lantern that far surpasses my own. But we both come at it from different takes, So I appreciate the comments. It was hard to remain positive over the COVID thing, but we did our best. It was fun recording. Every week? It was every week we were doing one, and
there for a while was every week.
We were having a good time doing it, and it helped him and I kind of decompress from the weeks of quarantine and containment and stuff, and it felt like we were doing something with ourselves. So and I appreciate what you say. Recommend it to anybody. It's a good podcast. I'm flattered every day to be a part of this thing with Myron, and I love doing it. I was looking forward to doing it tonight because it's been since Christmas when we recorded, and I was like, man, I can't wait to do the next episode. And here we are. And there's fans like you that keep us going. And I know Myron's going to be having to tongue tie himself in the coming days with future state. But we all have our likes, and we're entitled to our own opinions when it comes to our likes. And that doesn't make us bad people. That just makes us critical viewers and observationists when it comes to things that we enjoy.
True.
And that's what makes the world go round. I don't expect everybody to like what I like, and I'm not going to push my likes on anybody else. And I expect the same in return when it comes to any fandom. But standing across the aisle, you're still my friend.
Right. That's right.
Give a crap if you like Simon Baz or not. You're still my friend. I'm cool with that. Read them. Convince me to like Simon Baz. I'm open to an intellectual challenge. And when it comes to a conversation about characters. But at the end of the day, we all still have our favorites that we're not going to be knocked from. And but here we are. And thanks for everything. I just, like I said, I'm flattered about the comment. But I'm gonna defer that to Myron being the ultimate guru when it comes to the Green Lantern Corps.
I am far from a guru. I just have been reading books too long. I do appreciate the iTunes reviews. Those are really important to the show because they do help us show up when somebody goes to the iTunes store and goes searching for things. And still, despite all the different platforms that are out there, that's still the number one way people listen to podcasts. So it's really important. So I appreciate you taking the time out and leaving us a comment, and especially one that's so flattering. So I do really appreciate that. The other thing too, Phil, we had some feedback from our friend Donnie, the Emerald Enthusiast. He sent me a video on Twitter, and basically he was complimenting how we dealt with the Mosaic story in the last episode because it was written by Gerard Jones, and he really appreciated and respected how we handled the Gerard Jones facet of that whole thing. And so I wanted to make sure to mention that, Phil, because you were certainly a big part of that. And it's certainly hard sometimes to talk about those kinds of things when you've got someone who's done something so heinous, but yet they've done something in their career that is an important part of the Green Lantern legacy. And how can we talk about Green Lantern and not talk about those books? It's an important chapter in the history of the character, regardless of who wrote it. And so we kind of have to, sometimes, I don't want to say we're not tiptoeing around it, and we're not excusing what the person did, but at the same time, we're not going to ignore the content. Not that we're going to trumpet it, but, you know.
Well, it's like that old saying goes. I mean, we're admiring the person for his writing for that time. We're not admiring the person because he did what he did. You know, it's like, I mean, it's a tough sale on anybody because, you know as well as I do, once you get branded a certain way, let alone by your fans and social media and everything else, you're never going to come out from under that. You're never going to come out. I mean, it's just it's stuck with you. You know, it's like this whole Ray Fisher thing. You know, that's one of those things. It's going to be stuck right now until it's handled or dealt with. You know, and
well, it reminds me a little bit of the Ethan Van Sciver situation where, you know, someone who's very outspoken has some views which maybe don't line up with the majority of people, but at the same time, he's got his right to have his views. And whether you agree with him or not, you can't deny the guy had a huge impact on Green Lantern, and his artwork still looks pretty darn good.
Mm-hmm. I agree. I totally agree.
But at any rate, Power Ring, why don't you tell people how they can be a part of the show?
You can become a part of the show by leaving a message up to 1 minute long on our voicemail line. Call us at 406-POD-OA. That's 406-763-6362. You can also email us at podcast@blogofoa.com. We'd love to hear from you.
All right, thanks, Ring. I appreciate that. And we'll be back in a couple weeks, probably doing a retro review because we don't have any more Green Lantern content coming out for another month. So we will jump back into the Geoff Johns run and pick up where we left off.
All right, that sounds good. So what are we on, issue 6 with that, right?
I think we just did issue 6 the last time we talked about it.
That's right. Okay.
So we'll be picking up with issue number 7, I believe. We'll double check that. So we should be back in a couple weeks. Right. As always, we appreciate you guys. Take care of each other. Keep that power ring charged. And make every day your brightest day.
The Podcast of OA is the official podcast of the Blog of OA and a proud member of the Comics Podcast Network. Share your comments and questions by calling the show's voicemail line at 406-POD-OA. That's 406-763-6362. You can send your emails to podcast@blogofoa.com. You can also find the Blog of OA and the Podcast of OA on Twitter and Facebook. Green Lantern and other related characters are the copyrighted property of DC Comics Incorporated and are used without permission. The Blog of OA and the Podcast of OA are fan productions and do not claim any ownership over the Green Lantern or any other copyrighted properties.